Hey guys, so in this video, I'm going to be showing you how we can integrate Stripe into our Django application and actually take in payments from our website. So the example I'm going to be working with today is going to be a simple donation landing page that will allow us to select an amount we want to donate with this form right here, add in some basic information, and then once we add in a card, that card will be sent to Stripe on submission, and Stripe will take care of that payment and actually charge the card. So the reason why I chose a donation landing page is because it's the simplest application that I can think of that doesn't really require too much work on the back end and setup, but does get us working with that Stripe API right away with minimal setup. So it's a good way to get understanding on to get a good understanding of Stripe and how it all works. But later on, I am going to be putting together a full tutorial on an e-commerce website. So I highly recommend you get started with this, get familiar with the process, and then once we get to something more complex like an e-commerce website, it'll be easier to understand and actually get working with that. So go ahead, go to this URL. If you want to donate, go ahead and donate, but don't feel obligated to. Just download the source code and follow along with the tutorial. Okay, so let's go ahead and just recap the code I have so far. I set up a basic Django project. There's not much done to it yet, but I did a little bit of prep work, and I'll also provide this source code in the description. So if you want to start off exactly where I'm at without setting up your own app, go ahead and download that from the video description, and the final product will be in that website link. So within this app, we have our base project that we called Buy Dennis Coffee, and we have one app within it called Base. We have that configured right here, and here's the URLs patterns to that, to the urls.py file, and I also have my virtual environment and my static files. So within my static files, I just have that profile picture, different versions of that coffee cup, and a check mark that you'll see in a bit here. So our static files down in settings.py, we just configure that to render the images and any other static files that we have. And if we go into our app here, into base, we have our templates here. So we have one main template that we're gonna use to inherit from here. So it's just a basic title with our block of content. And if we go to our index.html page, this is where that main landing page will be. So it just inherits from our template. We load static, and we also have our success page. So it also inherits from that main template, and we just have a success message that returns us back to that main page. So let's go ahead and open up our views here. And within views, we just have 3 views, and I'll also open up the URLs here. So we have 3 views. The first one is just that index page, which if I open up the browser here, that's all we have so far. Then we have charge, which doesn't return a page. It's just gonna go ahead and process that card information and then redirect us back to this success page right here. So it's going to send us back to this URL pattern, which is going to pull up this view right here. So in this view, we're just going to pass in an argument of the amount that was donated, and then just go ahead and say thank you. So redirect and reverse were imported, and we're also going to use JSON response. So let's go ahead and try out those other URL patterns. So if we just go ahead and do success, whatever amount that's passed into our parameter right here is what's going to show right in this page. So thank you for a donation of, at this point, $10. And if I change that to 12, it'll adjust and we can go back to the donation page. So very simple setup, just some static file configuration, some URLs, and some basic views. So let's go ahead and actually open up Stripe right now. And if you don't have Stripe, you want to go ahead and just set up an account. And I opened up a dummy account, so I'm not afraid to show any of the API keys or anything like that. I'll make sure I delete them before I upload the video, but go to stripe.com, and if you don't have an account, set it up. But what we're gonna work with is gonna be, once it loads, is in the developer section here. So we have testing data and we have live data, which we can go back and forth with. So we can actually submit fake payments with a fake credit card and see how that data is processed. So if we go into developers and API keys, this is where we're going to start actually working with, I believe, our publishable key and our secret key right here that will allow us to actually connect to the account via code and actually start working with it. these are the keys that we're going to use within our app to actually connect to our Stripe account from our Django app here. So our publishable key, this is the key that you can actually show within your JavaScript. It's not bad if anyone sees this. It's less secret, but the one that you want to hide is going to be the secret key right here. So this is basically access to your account right here. We're viewing this in test data, and we can actually, if we switch this right here, this is going to switch to the live key, and we can go back to the test one. So let's make sure we start working with the test one, and let's go ahead and actually use this key right here that I'll copy and actually configure our Stripe account. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and just open up the Stripe document, so Stripe API docs, and we're gonna start working with the basic setup here. So I'll find what we need for Python and actually run an import. So I'll just open up Quick Start in another file here, but I think we can actually start working with this right here. So let's go ahead and first pip install Stripe, and I believe that's in the Quick Start. So if I scroll down here, so I'll actually link this up in the video description, but if we're logged in, we'll actually see our real keys right here. So let's go ahead and run pip install. We won't do -- upgrade, we'll just do pip install Stripe. So we'll do that, and then we can actually run the import. So pip install Stripe. And once we're publishing this live, I'll actually make sure to put this in the requirements.txt file, but I'll turn my server back on, and I'm actually gonna leave my key right within the views file just to make things easier, but I highly recommend you put this in somewhere like settings.py or somewhere where it's hidden if you ever show somebody your application that they can't see the key that you're using. So if we go back to our documentation here, we want to run this import and we want to use the API key. So this is where, this is actually our key that we see right here. So if you look at it, I believe it's the same numbers. It ends with 5ML. So yeah, that's the same number. So let's go ahead and first import Stripe. So if we go back to our application, let's go ahead and import Stripe, and we want to set up our Stripe API key here. So we want to set this, and then we're gonna start referencing this in the video here. So we'll set that up top. And one of the things I wanted to go over before we really get into working with Stripe is PCI compliance. So if you're ever working with credit cards or dealing with this kind of stuff, you're probably gonna hear this, and it stands for payment card payment card industry. So basically, there's a certain way you should deal with people's card information because you're dealing with credit cards or debit cards. It's much more sensitive data. So you want to make sure that you're doing things the right way. And one example that Stripe really helps us with is it really helps us in not having to store any card information. You never want to have a person's credit card hit your server, especially if you're not really familiar with how everything works. And Stripe helps us tokenize that information and actually work with tokens that represent a credit card and not have to actually store that data. So I highly recommend, once you get into this, to look into PCI compliance. Just make sure you're following things to standard, but it is something that Stripe really helps us with. So let's go ahead and actually start working with a form and adding elements into our template that can actually send data to this index this index view right here. So there's 3 different ways we can go about actually handling payments here. So the first way is just to use Stripe checkout, which basically just sends us to another page that Stripe provides, and Stripe takes care of everything there. The problem with this is it's not really customizable. We want to use our own forms. So what we're going to use is the charges API here. So we're going to use some of Stripe's built-in elements and then actually start customizing the forms. And the last way, which is the payments intents API, we're not going to use that. It's just a different way of doing things that Stripe is trying to integrate that might be better practices, but the charges API is what we're going to work with, and the one that still works well today. So we're going to use this, and we're going to add in our form with Stripe elements. So Stripe is actually going to give us some forms that we can work with that we can customize. So let's go ahead and just use Stripe JS elements, and we're actually going to just put in some code into our template here that's going to allow us to just render a basic form here. So let's go ahead and scroll through this, and again, I'll link all of this up. But if we look through Stripe elements, here's the first element we're going to work with right here, which allows us to see the HTML, the CSS, and some pre-built JavaScript, which I'll briefly cover. And if you look down, you can actually see different elements. So we can use If we look at the results here, so this is if we want to work with some bank information, different types of form elements, and you can see a full demo. So let's go ahead and actually start with this one. So we're just going to use this card form, and then we'll actually customize it so we can see things like a person's username or a nickname and an actual email. So if I go to the HTML, first thing I'm going to do is actually just paste in that Stripe link in the top of my template. So I want to make sure that that is in my main template here. So we'll throw that into the head tag so it'll be available on all pages. And then we're actually going to start working with index.html. So because I put that into the main template, we can access it here. So we have that in, and then our actual form. So let's go ahead and just paste that in. And we'll just paste it here. So we'll paste the form in, and we can indent that. So we have our form, and right now it takes us to the URL of charge, and I just want to make that dynamic and do things the Django way. So I call that charge right here in the name. So we'll just do URL and charge. So it's going to send it to that URL. We have our method of post and the payment form. Make sure you don't change this if you're using the built-in links that we're using right now, because this JavaScript is going to rely on that, and also what we throw in next. So we have the form, and we have a label for our credit card, and that field will actually sit right here. So within card element, and that's what the JavaScript is going to take care of for us. So if I go to the JavaScript portion, we're just going to go ahead and throw in this code. And I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I will reference a few things here. So don't let this intimidate you. Just make sure you're on this same link and actually pasting this in. If it gets updated, just go to the updated version. But we are going to paste this into JavaScript, and I'm going to put it all within the template just to keep things simple. So it might make the page look a little bit messy, but it's going to keep it within one page so we're not jumping around everywhere. So I'll make sure to indent that. And this is that public key from our Stripe account. So basically we're just getting this publishable API key right here and setting that to Stripe. So that's how Stripe knows where we're coming from. And it's going to use that key to actually start making API calls. And then we're setting up some styling for our form fields. And then we're actually going to append that form and actually let Stripe take care of this process for us. So don't worry too much about the details. I mean, look into them on your own, but just paste in what we're doing here. And the last thing we want to do is actually add the styling. So now we'll go to the CSS part. So we have HTML, CSS now, and we'll paste this in, and then we can actually refresh it from here. So let's go ahead and, oops, grab too much. So I'm not a big fan of just copying and pasting, but in this case, this is all built into Stripe, so I'll just recommend reading the documentation. So our JavaScript is down here, and I'll make sure to separate it. Then we have our form, and we'll put the styling, again, right within the page here. So let's go ahead and do that, and paste that in. So now we have our CSS from Stripe. So this is all Stripe. Then we have our HTML form, and we have our JavaScript. So once that's in and we've pasted that all into our template, if we refresh, we should now have this form field. So here we go. And this is a dummy card that Stripe actually provides. So I'm going to throw in some data and just do 1223, 123, and then whichever zip code we want to use. And then once we submit this data, what's going to happen here is Stripe is actually going to send this token right here to our Stripe account. So the token is what's providing us the information and knowing where it's going to send it. So it's going to send this card information not to our server, so we never want to see it from when the user enters this information in, and it sends it to Stripe. And what Stripe's going to do is go ahead and return back a token representation of the card. So we're not going to get back the card information. We're going to get a token that represents the card, so it's going to be encrypted, and then we can send that token back to our view. So we'll send that token back to our view, and then that's what Stripe knows to charge. So it knows which credit card to actually process. So let's go ahead and actually, in our form, just to make sure not to confuse you, I'm going to make sure and add this Stripe link not within my template, but directly within the index.html file, just because I don't want to mix anything up. So I'll actually put that under the CSS. So because of this, we're able to actually use all of this information. So we have that set up, and we also want a CSRF token. So the default Stripe integration doesn't provide that, because this can be used on any type of application. So we have our token, and we're getting this card from fake Stripe cards. So if I go to just look up Stripe dummy cards, so these are cards we can use for testing. They'll just create fake payments for us, and credit cards that Stripe can actually process. So there's a bunch of different ones. I'm using this one right here, 4242, for the CVC, any 3 digits, and a future date, and then the zip code can be whatever we want. So let's go ahead and actually process this, and when we send it back to our view, I want to go ahead and print out what we sent. So let's go ahead and test it and go to our page, and I'll actually need to refresh it because we just added that token. So 4242, just do that a bunch of times, and 1223, 123, and then some kind of zip code. And if I move this to the right and open up my console, let's go ahead and submit it. So here we go. It sent us to that success page. And if you look at the data we just printed out, we get our token, or our CSRF token, and we get that Stripe token. So this is what we're going to use. This is a representation of that credit card. So we secured it, and Stripe basically hides that card information, so we never actually have to store that information or secure it in any other way. So we have our card, and now we can actually start working with that data. So one thing I wanted to say is this form will not work when we're using HTTP. So right now, because we're in test mode and we're using a test key, we're able to work with it, but we are going to need to use SSL to actually protect this, because Stripe will not work and won't even let us work with the form, I believe, let alone submit that data. So that's something I'll cover once we push this on a server. So let's go ahead and just add some more data. So we want an email and a nickname here. So in our template, we want to just send some more data with that form, and I'll close out the main template, and we'll just use the index.html. So in here, we can add in whatever form elements we want. So we're actually going to create a user. So let's just go ahead and create an input field for an email. So we'll just make that a text field for now, call this email, and we also want a nickname. So we'll just go ahead and duplicate this, and we'll say nickname. And I'll just add some placeholder values so we can see it instead of a label. So email, and then we'll do ... and we'll call this one nickname. Okay, so we just added this to our form, and we can actually submit that data with our form. So let's go ahead and try it one more time and print it out, make sure it's working, and we'll work on styling a little bit later, but let's go ahead and just make sure this works. So for the email, we'll just use, I'll use my email, and we'll just say Dennis Ivy, and we'll throw in a card again. Okay, so we submit the data, and now we have our email, we have our nickname, and our Stripe token. So let's go back to the Stripe documentation and see what we need here. So in our Stripe docs, we're going to be working with core resources, and we want to use the customer object right here and charges. So the first thing we want to do is create a customer. So again, I'll link this up too, but to create a customer, what we want to do is just use the Stripe API key. So we have that set up, and we can create a Stripe customer by doing stripe.customer.create, and we'll add a few attributes. So let's go ahead and use this. And I have a few elements that I'm going to add, or a few attributes based off of what I've built in my demo here. So I'm just going to reference that, but we're going to use Stripe. So this object right here, which we imported, and we're going to do .customer with a capital C .create. And we're going to give our customer two attributes. So we're first going to create our customer, and then once that customer is created, we're actually going to create a charge, and we're gonna connect that charge to the customer. So let's try this, and we'll first set an email. So the email is gonna be request.post. So remember, we sent that in the form, so we can access that by using this right here. So the email is going to be set to that email and then the nickname. So request.post, we're going to take the email, and for the name, I believe the attribute is called name. Let me take a look. So yeah, it's name. We're going to use name equals, and then we're just going to repeat this right here. So request.post, and we're going to just say nickname. So let's actually try this without creating the charge. So first, we're going to create a customer. So let's go ahead and try that, and we'll fill out that form. So let's go ahead and we're going to use the same email, and we're going to set the nickname to Dennis Ivy, and then we're going to use the same card. So we're going to use this a lot in this video probably, but we'll do 1223 123, and then some zip code. And let's go ahead and test it and make sure everything's working. So I'll move this over. Okay, so it looks like everything went successfully here. So we're to the success page. Thank you for your donation. We can go back. And if we go to our Stripe account and go into our main dashboard, so we shouldn't have a charge yet, but we should add a customer. So if we go to customers, here we go. So we have an email and the description. So I believe that should be the name. I'll try to fix that, but it looks like everything went well. We created a customer successfully and we attached that. So let's go ahead and put this in a customer variable and actually create a charge. So we'll just go ahead and say charge is going to be equal to, and then let's look at the Stripe documentation, and within core resources. So core resources, we're going to open up, not checkout, but let's make sure I have all this. Let's go to charges. So to create a charge, again, all the attributes, everything is listed here. I'm just working off of the demo app that I set up, but it's all listed in here. So it's stripe.charge, and then the amount is going to be in pennies. So this is going to be 2,000 is going to represent $20, I believe. Yeah, so $20. If you wanted to do $2, it would be 100. So the information I'm going to submit, I'm just going to have to run a calculation to make sure it adds up to that. And then we're going to set the currency and then that token that we got back, and then actually go ahead and attach this to a customer. So let's go ahead and do stripe.charge, and charge is with a capital C, and then .create. So we're going to create a charge, and the first thing I'm going to do is actually attach this to a customer. So I'm going to say customer is going to equal to, and then that's why we put that in a variable. So we're attaching this charge to this customer. And the next thing I'm going to do is actually set the amount. So the amount, again, because it's in pennies, I'm just going to set it and hard code it right now at 500 pennies. So that's going to be a $5 charge. And the currency, I'm going to set that to USD. So currency is going to equal to USD in a string value. And we're going to set the description. So description, this is just going to be a donation. And we also, before I forget, we also need to add in that token. So we can add the source, which is going to be the source that's going to be charged. So this is going to be that credit card that we're going to charge, and we can actually put that directly into this charge. But in this case, because we want to charge a specific customer, we can actually just put it into the customer, and then by default, this charge will know to use this source. So for that, we're going to use request.post, and remember in our return value, it was called Stripe token. So Stripe token with a capital T, and that was that value that we returned. So let's go ahead and try this. We created our customer, and we created the charge and attached that charge to this customer. And before I move on, we need to make sure to fix this misspell. So description, and that looks good, I think. So let's go ahead and open this up and create a new customer. We'll call this one Dennis1, and we'll use Dennis1 here, add in the card information. And I'm actually going to move this to the right here so we can see that post request. So here's that Stripe token. We've taken that token and then we use it right here. So we provide that as a source, and that is the card that's going to be charged, represented in a token. So if I go to my Stripe account, I actually had to test this a few times. So we added a few different customers when I was debugging, but we should see a fourth customer appear in here. So Dennis1, and if we look at Dennis1 right here, we should see a charge. So I'm not sure why I don't see that right now. Okay, so yes, I see a charge, and if we go back to our dashboard, there's a charge for $5, and we successfully completed our first charge to our test account. So we created a customer and created a charge. So what I want to do now is actually go ahead and set this amount right here to be dynamic and actually allow the user to provide that in a drop-down form. So we want to give them a few options and let them customize that, and then that data will be sent back with the form, and it will no longer be a static amount of 5, but whatever the user provided. So first thing is I'll remove that, and I'm going to reference the demo code that I built out and actually steal a part from here. So I'll paste this in, and don't worry, I'll go slow enough to where you can follow. In my form here, just above the 2 inputs of email and nickname, we'll paste this select option in. So select just gives us this drop-down menu of 3 options that have the value of 5, 10, or 25 with the custom message. So we named it amount, gave it the ID of amount, and we also set it to required. So I'll actually set these 2 fields to required because we always want the user to have an email or a nickname if we're going to create a customer. And now that we have that within our request.post, we can actually set the value of amount, and we'll just do we'll put it in an integer. Actually, we'll just do request.post first, and we're going to get the amount. So we send that in with the form now, and I actually want to make this an integer. If this is ever a floating point number, Stripe will not accept that. It needs to be an integer, and we'll just take amount and we'll put that in here. And right now, if we send 5, we need to multiply that by 100. So it means that we need to convert this into 5 times 100, so it'd be 500 pennies representing $5. So we only do this if we're sending back that number that way. And let's go ahead and give this a test and actually give the user the option. So let's say we want to donate $25, and this is going to come from Dennis3, and throw in that card again. And when I submit this, I want to see the amount go through. So I want to make sure that's actually being processed. And if we look right here, so amount is being sent. Then we go into the form here. We grab it from the post data. We throw that in here, and we multiply that by 100 to make that 500 cents, which represents $5, and, or actually in this case, $25. So if we refresh our Stripe account, there we go. We just donated $25. So if we go to payments, we should see that new payment. So that customizes it and allows us to change that value. That can be a drop-down menu. Maybe you want users to enter their own amount, whatever you want that to be. So let's go ahead and actually style the website now. I'm going to go as slow as possible, but I am going to be copying and pasting for this part. So if we go back to my demo code here, I'm just going to go ahead and paste in the CSS that I customized and some Google font here. So we'll take these 2. Again, I'll try to explain as much as I can, but I am going to paste this into my main template. So we're going to override this one right here and paste in 2 different style sheets that I'm just going to put in directly to the header instead of putting it into our static files, because I didn't want to configure all that. But there's 2 of them in our template, and inside of index now, we're going to minimize our form. And I am actually going to paste in the entire layout minus the form. So I'll show you what I mean right now, and then we'll actually go through this. So here's our form. I'm going to throw that underneath. And if I save this, so our form is actually going to be outside of our container. We pasted in all the CSS for this code right here, and we need to add in our form right here. So let's go ahead and refresh it, see what this looks like at the moment. Looks like I imported something wrong, and I think that's right here. That should be static and then images / Dennis. So don't worry about this. It'll all be in your source code. So there we go. Here's our layout. It's all screwed up at this moment. But what I need to do right now is this form right here that's above our main container. So what we've been working on, we actually need to go ahead and put that in here. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we'll actually customize our form. So remember, we're in index.html and we're pasting our form inside of this block element. So I'll just make sure to indent this. I'll save that and let's just make sure it's working all right for now. Okay, so our layout is kind of there right now. We need to add in some custom styling to our form, but let me recap what I did here and what I did with that success page. So if I go back to success, that's now styled. So let's go ahead and recap it. So we added in this main container, and I'm actually gonna put in my CSS on the right so I can see it and reference it. But our font is now looking like this because of this Google font we imported. So here's a link to that. And I put everything into one main container, and then I split it up into 2 columns here. So we have one column here and another one. So this is my left column, this is my right column. And inside of those, I added in a wrapper inside of each column. So my left wrapper is this blue element right here. So that's what we're seeing. And then we have our image right here along with this title. So buy us coffee, one-time donation, that's right here. And then if we go down, we clear that float, we add in that line break, and we have our form. But underneath our form, we have our right side, which is just another column with the ID of right wrapper, 3 images, and then that message with our GitHub link. So I hope that's pretty simple to follow. Again, just review the source code. And what we need to do now is actually style up our form fields. So let's reference the CSS. So if I go in here, this is for my landing page. We have our background. It's a light gray or kind of like an eggshell white. We have our font set to our H3 and H5 tags. We set the sizes. And if we go down, here's our container that's centered right here, our 2 columns with a width of 50%, and then styling for each wrapper right here. So based off my old code, if we go above our select box here, we're just gonna create a div around that select wrapper or select drop-down menu there, and we'll indent that. And this needs a class of, I believe it's form-field-12 right now. So if I look at my CSS, it should be right here. So I need to place that there. And I also need to add a label. So I'll just copy and paste this right here. So we give the label of choose amount and a couple of break tags to add some spacing, and we'll just make sure that's all working. So we just wrapped this select drop-down menu in a div and gave it a label. So if I refresh that, okay, so that's a little bit better. And we also need to wrap each input field with form-field6. So we'll just put those in 2 wrappers, and that'll be for each input. So make sure to indent that, make it easier to see there. And we'll repeat that. So we have that above this one. Okay, so that should wrap our 2 fields and make it this 50% width right here. And I think the last thing we need to do is add a little bit of styling just underneath this button here. So if I look at the demo code, what we're doing here is we're actually clearing a float and we're putting this HR tag, and I think that's it. And then we also need this class and that inline styling. So that'll go just above that button right there. Can remove that. So that's going to give it this spacing right here, and we also need the styling for the button. So for the button, we just give it the class of my button, which we have in our CSS, and just a different background color. And we'll actually change this to an input field to make this styling a little bit better. So let's go ahead and just recreate it, and we'll make the type submit, and the value we'll just say submit payment, just like before. So submit payment. And if I throw in my styling in here, so we added the class and the styling for the background color. If we remove the button, that form should still work how it's meant to work. And now looks like we have the proper styling. So let's go ahead and fix this right here. So that should solve our issue. Okay, so from here, what I'm gonna do is actually prep this code to push it live and then take care of that SSL issue. So I'm not gonna walk through the steps too much because I have a full tutorial on this, but I'll try to explain as much as I can as I go. But we are gonna use Heroku for this. So what I'm gonna do here is actually create a new app here on Heroku. So if you don't have this, go ahead and create an account. And we're just gonna call this by Dennis Coffee, and then we'll just say test. So I'm actually gonna take this down. The domain you're actually gonna get the code from is this one right here. Let me type it in really quick. So by Dennis Coffee.Heroku app. So this is actually where the demo app will sit, but once I push this live, I'm actually gonna take it down. So we created our app here, and in Heroku, we're gonna go ahead and add a build pack. So we're gonna set that to Python. And we're actually gonna use GitHub to push our code. So when we deploy it, we're gonna use the GitHub method here. So what I'm gonna do is actually create a GitHub repo and push the code there, and we'll connect it. So let's go to GitHub and create one. And we'll actually make this a private repository. So go ahead and just create a new one. And we'll just say by Dennis Coffee test. So we'll just keep some kind of familiarity there, and we'll make that private, and we'll just go ahead and just create that repo. Okay, so we have our GitHub repository and we have our app on Heroku. So if you look at it right now, it's not connected. If we open it up, it's just this blank Heroku app and our GitHub repo. So we're actually gonna follow these steps to get connected, but before we do that, we do need to configure a few things to prep our full app here. So let's go ahead and run a few pip installs, and the first one we're gonna do is pip install white noise. So this is to serve our static files for Heroku. I'm not gonna go too deep into that. This is in another video, but after this, we're gonna do pip install gunicorn. And I don't know if that's gunicorn or gunicorn. I've not gotten that right for a while, so we just need to run that pip install too. And let's go ahead and run pip freeze. And we'll just do requirements.txt. So this is just for the dependency, so Heroku knows what we're using here. And here's our requirements.txt. So we have Django, gunicorn, and white noise. So I'll just run Python manage.py, and then we're going to do collect static. Okay, so that ran because of our, if you look into our settings.py file here, we were able to run collect static, and that was supposed to create a folder called static files in here. So if I look right there, static files are configured. And I also want to set allowed host. So if I go up into allowed host here, we're gonna throw in two URLs. So we're gonna throw in port 8000. So we wanna make sure this is allowed, and we also want the Heroku app. So we'll make that a string value, remove the 8000, and set that base URL. We also wanna remove this. And in our Heroku app, so the app is gonna be called, let's close this out here. So this is the domain to the app. So we also wanna throw this in, and once we push it, we wanna make sure that our website actually allows it. So let's go ahead and remove all this. Okay, so there we go. That's our allowed apps. And I wanna actually add in white noise into our middleware, so Django knows how to serve that. So what we'll do is just look up Django white noise, and we need to throw in a little strip of code into our middleware list here. So let's go ahead and find this. So it's right here, middleware. We want to paste that into right here. So just underneath that section, want to make sure that it's obvious that that was added. So we'll create a space, and now we'll just add a few more files. So we're going to add a proc file, and that's going to be with a capital P here. So proc file, and within proc file, I just wrote out some code here. We want to add this right here. So we're going to set the dyno types for Heroku here. So gunicorn And this needs to be the name of our app here. So by Dennis Coffee, that's correct. And we also want to add a runtime.txt. So runtime.txt. And in there, all we need to do is specify the version of Python that we're using. So we'll throw that into runtime.txt. And we also need to add a gitignore file. So we'll do gitignore, and we need to add a little bit more code into our settings.py file. So we'll do .gitignore. And the only thing I'm going to ignore, I'm not going to go too into detail with this. We're just going to ignore our virtual environment. So whenever we push this to GitHub, we'll make sure not to throw all this code in there. And in our settings.py, what we want to do is whenever our app is live, we want to make sure that debug is set to false here. So for that, what I'm going to do is just run this conditional, which we'll add to later once we're pushing live. But at the bottom of our settings.py file, what I'm going to say is when os.getCurrentWorking is equal to app. So this is basically the file path when we're local, but when we're live, this should be just a string value of app. So it reads where whenever our app turns on, we need to figure out if this is on Heroku or localhost. And if we're on Heroku, we set debug, and this needs to be capitalized, to false. So we're just changing that. And now we should be ready for whenever our app is live, we just change the status of debug. So I'm not sure why Stripe isn't showing up here. It should run in our pip freeze. So let's just try installing it again, because it should show up there. Maybe I uninstalled it by accident. I must have done that, or maybe ran that outside of my virtual environment. But this is just for me to do. If you've already done this, don't worry about it. But now I need to run pip freeze again and make sure it's actually added into my requirements.txt file. Okay, so now everything looks good. Stripe is right here. It added some dependencies with it. So let's go ahead and actually go ahead and create our GitHub account, or push our files into our GitHub repo. So from our app here, let's just go ahead and follow step by step right here. So we'll just do git init. So we'll initialize it, and we'll just check the status. So we have these files here. Let's go ahead and add them. So git add, we're following this right here. And now let's just do a commit. So git commit -m, and I'll just say first commit. And now we can actually set our remote here. So I'll just grab this right here and paste that in, and we'll just do git remote -v to make sure that connected. So looks like we're in the right account, and now we can actually just push it. So git push -u origin master, and that should throw it into the master branch. And once this is done, I can refresh it, and we should see our files now in our GitHub repo. So what we need to do now is actually go to our Heroku app and connect to it. So let's go ahead and go to deploy and change this to GitHub, and we'll just find it. So we'll say by Dennis, and I should have two of these, I think. So by Dennis Coffee Test, we want to connect to it, and now we are ready to deploy. So once it's connected, we can just go ahead and choose the branch we want to deploy. So right now we only have master. So we'll just hit deploy and give this a few seconds here to run through, and we'll see if everything worked out correctly. Okay, so it tells us our app deployed. Let's go ahead and see if everything worked correctly. Here's our app, by DennisCoffeeTest.herokuapp.com. And one of the things I can't figure out right now, at this point, it might be because we're using a test key, but you're actually going to want to switch to your live Stripe key. So right now we are in test, but once it's live, you want to go ahead and use this key right here. So once it loads, we're going to want to go ahead and change our app and then redeploy it with all the live information. So once you're ready to go live, make sure you switch this. And then what's going to happen here is this right here on your Heroku domain. Stripe requires this to be an HTTP or some kind of secure method here. I'm not too familiar with all the details here, but basically your site needs to be secure. And I think this is happening either because I'm logged into Heroku or for whatever reason. But if I open this app on a different domain what's going to happen here is this credit card is actually going to be hidden. So Stripe is going to see that we're not secure and it's going to hide it. So what we need to do is configure our app and make sure we're prepped for that. And Heroku actually makes this very easy. So if you have a Heroku account, if you upgrade your dynos to a paid account, you will actually get a free SSL security ticket right now. So upgrade to paid dynos to configure the SSL. So that's what we're going to do. If we go to overview, right now we're on free, and we're just going to go ahead, and if we switch this to a paid account, I won't do it right now, but so if we go to change dyno type and upgrade to the smallest amount of $7 a month, what's going to happen here is if we go to settings, we can actually go ahead, and I think by default this will give us a certificate. So give it a couple of minutes if it takes some time. And what we also want to do is force SSL for our app. So I looked up this article here, and what we want to do here is whenever our app is live, we want to go ahead and add this into our app. So whenever it's live, we want to force it to be an HTTP method. So by default, I don't think it will be. So we want to redirect it that way and make sure it's always secure. So you can do that from here or directly from the GitHub repo if you go into the application, but that should take care of it, and make sure your key is live. So that's it for this video. The app is live. Again, if you want to donate, please do, but don't feel obligated to. All the code will be provided along with the articles that I read through in the documentation. And the next project related to Django and Stripe is actually going to be my e-commerce website. So we're actually going to advance this and go up to where we're creating a full online store, and we're able to download digital products and pay for them. And we'll probably include some subscription models and maybe even physical products that require us to ship it out. So thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and I appreciate your support for this channel.